They didn't want to give up. A foam white archway, rakish facade and various casing moldings, all this was easy on the eyes. Abay Street 90. Semey, also known as Semipalatinsk, the former residence of the governor that after revolution turned into the House of Freedom. It's the current address of Museum of Local History. This is the building of a wealth of memories. This building hosted meetings of Semey residents. They spoke about the Alash movement, independence of Kazakh nation, delimitation and self-governance. This chapter in the chronicles of not only the museum, the city or the country hasn't been read yet. This is a story of how they didn't want to give up. These are unknown pages. If recent informers who became Bolsheviks wanted to go to blazes in far-off lands, we would wish them a safe trip. During the time of Tsarism, some of them acted as Christian missionaries, whilst others sold themselves to the gendarmerie and worked as secret denouncers. Others fooled people, the rest turned into robbers. Now, at the time of troubles and upon becoming Bolsheviks, they contemplate igniting the fire of discord. Chapter 1. Alash Kala. Petrograd with biting wind and a temperature of -10. This was an abnormally chilly spring of the revolutionary 1917. Protesters were out in the street, walking in shaky columns. In their hands they were clasping a few hurriedly made posters. It was self-determination of the nation. They believed that everything was possible. They considered that of all that the political experience and evolution could offer, the interim government was the closest to democracy. The events unfolded very rapidly, but they didn't live up to their expectations. First, it was the interim government, mainly comprised of cadets and opposing the creation of Kazakh autonomy. Alikhan Bukikhanov, old friend of Kerensky, was disappointed and left the cadets party. In summer of that year, Congress was arranged in Orenburg. Alash Party was founded, and in December, the second Congress, also in Orenburg, a decision was made to create the Alash autonomy. Alikhan Bukikhanov was elected as the head of the government. As far as I know, Kazakh leaders of Alash Orda didn't raise the issue of separation. They spoke about wider autonomy. In January 1918, the Reds entered Orenburg. Dutov fled and the Alash Orda members changed their location. The riverside settlement of Semipalatinsk was now the capital of the unrecognized state. This is Abay Street, Alash Orda Street, Bazarная Street. There is also Bazarная Square, the spiritual mission, Irtysh River. This all is a plan of Alash city as approved on the 28th of November 1916. On the 5th of June 1918, a Kazakh troop worth 500 men entered the city of Alash. The troop was armed and militarily trained. It had its own uniform resembling national camisole with leather-threaded collars. The Soviet authority was proclaimed illegal and terrorist. A regular army was created and Alash Orda turned to the youths, calling for signing up to military schools in Uralsk and Semipalatinsk. Small groups of young Alash Orda members went in three to voluntarily settle down to a cause of fight against Bolsheviks. This is Second Sifolin wrote. A decision was made to not interfere with Russia's infighting. The most important task was to unite its people. They say that during the times of turbulence and civil war, only by uniting and finding common interests can one stop this, and with legal authority and methods achieve something at the state stage. In the absence of any authority, the country risks having a civil war. Waves of anarchy are sweeping big cities and villages across the state, and anarchy is growing day in, day out. Organization of a firm power, which all the people of Kyrgyz regions could recognize, is the only way out of this deadlock. These words had been said before the civil war flooded good intentions in the blood. They were all smart and acute, but couldn't discern enemies among friends. So other people served as the firm power, but they didn't give up. Chapter 2: The Diaries of KGB Serviceman. Considerable forces of counter-revolution focused in Semipalatinsk. The fight for the establishment of Soviet power drew out, but Semipalatinsk Bolsheviks continued to prepare the armed revolt. It is said that an author himself had brought this copybook to the museum during the Soviet time. Perhaps I've even started to study this, but time had changed and handwritten memoirs were forgotten. There are some unexplored materials. We've found Kenesary Bakin's diary. They were written in Russian. He was the Red Man in the 1920s. Kenesary Bakin is now a forgotten person, but there was a time when he was called the threat to counter-revolution. He was planted in Alash Orda. They were under surveillance during Tsarism and remained even under closer watch after that. The main task of the Emergency Commission, organized in December 1917, was to fight counter-revolution.
К вечеру собрались гости, около 10 человек.
Around 10 guests gathered in the evening. They talked about the Council of Deputies. As I understood, they didn't like the council very much. Someone named Turgambayev says, "I don't know anything. First of all, we need to cut telegraph and telephone lines in several places. Secondly, the troops, which we are now training, need to be doubled." Marsekov rose from his place. Turgambayev, one of the outstanding members of Alash, like Raimzhan Marsekov, who was also one of the organizers of Alash regiment. Those were simply get-togethers of like-minded people over the table with spouses and talks about the future. They've all been described in the diaries in detail, sometimes up to the point of what was served at the table. However, this is not important. Marsekov rose from his place and started speaking with a high-pitched voice. This is not right either. No matter what, we need to get in touch with Kolchak and ask him to help us with arms. Secondly, we would get a lot of help from the Russian Cossacks. We should never forget about this. They were realists. And when necessary, they cooperated with functionaries of the Russian Empire and with various political figures. As realists, they understood that they couldn't resist external pressure. They didn't have such simple and not very truthful slogans as the ones which Bolsheviks had. Nonetheless, they attempted to find a way out and get allies. Samara Committee of Constituent Assembly, known as Komuch, the Orenburg chieftain Dutev, Provisional Siberian government led by Admiral Kolchak. The faces changed, but not the situations. This is how they imagined ways out of the situation. That's the reason why they agreed to temporize with the regime and the authorities. The fact that these regimes and authorities tended to betray was a completely different story. Alash Orda leaders conspired with the Cossack chieftain Dutev on agreed actions and wrote about that openly in the newspaper Kazakh. The newspaper also said that training of Kazakh police officers had been taking place in the Orenburg military school where Cossack officers were normally educated. Mustafa Chokay headed the Turkestan autonomy. In Omsk, Makan Aytpenov created Uzhus party, Dostmuhamedov controlled Alash Orda branch in Uralsk, and Bukikhanov did the same in Semipalatinsk. They also had their recent acquaintances, such as Sifulin, who joined Bolsheviks. They were together, and on their own at the same time. They were united by the same idea and dream, but means of its fulfillment were different. Perhaps they all lacked unscrupulousness in the achievement of their goals. They even sorted their relations out in public, through newspapers. They were representatives of intelligentsia, which can hardly be successful in power structures. On On the 7th of July 1918, the delegation of Semipalatin's district council involving Marsekov, Kunanbayev and Berdalin arrived in Omsk to mediate the decision of administrative establishment, regulation of land relations and speed up of consideration of Kolchak's government of bills in court. They make Kolchak accept court action law based on democratic principles as introduced by the interim government. This was Kolchak's achievement, as he pushed the enactment of such a law for Kazakhs. But Kolchak lost. He was captured and sunk in the waterhole. All the plans of Alash Orda members were known and controlled by Bolsheviks via false or recruited agents. Chapter 3. Written by victors. A little-known detail of history, the Bolsheviks had a secret plan B. In case of a failure of the revolution, they would have formed a government in the Asian steppes and sit out there until better times arrived. They paid increasingly more attention to Central Asia and to Turkestan. It indeed was the reserve area for the Kremlin and the Bolshevik leaders, because the Kremlin then had a plan that if they lost and Moscow was seized by the White Guards, then all the senior Bolshevik management would relocate elsewhere, in particular to Turkestan. In Turkestan in Central Asia at that time, Alash Orda was the power to reckon with. They had already tried to find common ground, but to no avail. This is another page of history that's full of secrets. Representatives of Alash Orda, including Bukhanov, who had come to Stalin a few times, held these talks, but very few know about this. A tricky question is being posed. What is the status of communists in your places? Bukhanov answered. May I please tell you a parable? Once Hoja Nasriddin came to a meeting and held a horseshoe in his hands. Someone asked him, "What do you have in the hands?" Nasriddin answered, "This is a horseshoe for my donkey. I only need 3 horseshoes and the donkey itself." This is how I would describe the status of communists in Kazakhstan. This is largely a legend. To be more tangible, after a series of failed cooperation with all the rapidly emerging and just as rapidly disappearing provisional governments of different colors and kinds, a decision was made to enter into an agreement with Lenin. In the summer of 1919, newspaper Saryarka carried an announcement that the Bolsheviks were ready to have Kazakh autonomy and that negotiations with the Kremlin were going well. As paradoxically as it might sound, they didn't have any common groundwork with the Reds and they didn't want to be confrontational. Nevertheless, the Reds lashed out at them for nothing. Negotiations were held in person and over the phone, and a decision was reached to not prosecute the resigned Alash Orda members. They were shot down in the 1930s. But did they really put up with it? They were active and had talks with the regimes, the authorities and the political leaders. But what for? This was done to ensure freedom of their people. The shopping arcade, or to be more precise, its southwestern gateway, was its main hallmark. The intersection of Pushkin and the 9th of January was for the Alash Orda delegates on Orsk and Vedinska streets. Alash Orda was created in Orenburg. Along Sovetska Street, there is the archives containing papers on how it was destroyed in spring 1920. Is this a decree to destroy Alash Orda? Yes, there is information that all their property and money were to be confiscated and their laws considered invalid. 3 difficult years involving the Red and the White armies, the Constituent Assembly, Komuch, Siberian government, lack of food, murders, arrests, troubles, and the time of hope, when they didn't want to give up. That was a distant and happy time when friends and allies would gather around a table and a samovar. They mainly spoke about the future of their people and dreamed of having an independent state.